Hello class, I am Dr. Caban. Today's presentation is on Chapter 3, beginning on page 30 in your textbook, covering the content on legal and ethical aspects of nursing. This presentation will be brought to you in two lessons. Lesson 3.1, covering the content on legal requirements and terminology, and Lesson 3.2, covering the content on protection from lawsuits and code of ethics. Let's get started. Lesson 3.1, Legal Requirements and Terminology. Upon completing your reading assignment of Chapter 3, as well as previewing this presentation, you'll gain the following knowledge. You'll be able to explain the legal requirements for the practice of nursing and how that can relate to you as a student nurse. You'll also be able to identify the consequences of violating the Nurse Practice Act, examine the issues of professional accountability, professional discipline, and continuing education for licensed nurses. Finally, you'll be able to compare and contrast the terms negligence and malpractice. In the clinical practice setting, you will be able to do the following. Reflect on how laws relating to discrimination, workplace safety, child abuse, and sexual harassment affect your nursing practice. You'll be able to discuss the national patient safety goals and identify where these can be found. Also, you'll be able to interpret rights that a patient has in a hospital, nursing home, community setting, and psychiatric facility. This presentation will cover the following concepts: communication, ethics, healthcare laws, professionalism, and quality. It is critical for you as a nurse to understand legal and ethical codes of nursing, as it is essential for you to protect your patients from harm and practice safely. Ethical codes are different from laws. They are important because not all situations are covered by law, and there may not be one right answer. In these situations, ethical principles are applied, which are often by an ethical committee. Let's define what law means. Laws are a rule of conduct that are established by our government. Please look at page 31, box 3.1, where you would find legal terms and definitions. In the United States, laws come from three sources: the Constitution and Bill of Rights, laws made by elected officials, and regulations made by agencies created by elected officials. Constitutional laws, both federal and state, provide for basic rights and create the legislative bodies, Senate and Assembly, that write laws for governing our lives. Again, constitutional law provides for basic rights and creates legislative bodies. Judicial law results when a law or court decision is challenged and the judge affirms or reverses the decision. Administrative law comes from agencies created by the legislator. In healthcare, agencies such as the Department of Health and Human Services or Office of Professional Licensing oversees nursing and the other healthcare professions. So question, who is governed by administrative laws? Administrative law governs School of Nursing, licensures, hospitals, nursing homes, and home health agencies, and healthcare insurances such as Medicare, Medicaid, or private insurances or private insurance companies. Civil and criminal law. Statutes, also referred to as laws, may be either criminal or civil. Civil laws deal with potential wrongdoing of a person against another person. Civil laws guarantee individuals' rights, and a tort is a violation of civil law. You may be guilty of a tort if you harm your patient, for example, by providing the patient with the wrong medication. Criminal law deals with potential wrongdoing of a person against society. A crime is a wrong against society, and imprisonment and/or fines may result if one is convicted of a crime. Laws related to nursing practice and licensures. State licensure is required to practice as a nurse in the United States. Each state writes its own laws and regulations regarding licensures. This is known as Nurse Practice Act. It is extremely important for you to know the Nurse Practice Act of the state in which you are going to work in because these can differ from state to state. The scope of practice includes the definitions of nursing for the registered nurse, the licensed practitioner, or licensed vocational nurse. It may also include definitions for advanced practice nurses. Eligibility for licensure is determined by the state's Board of Nursing. Each state sends a representative to the National Council of the State Boards of Nursing, which develops the National Council Licensure Examination, which is known as the NCLEX. A passing score in the NCLEX is accepted in all states as one requirement for licensure. Reciprocity, nurse licensure compacts, or recognition of one's state's nursing license by another state is a current issue. As a student nurse, you will be held to the same standards as a licensed nurse. You will also face legal responsibilities for your own actions or inactions. You have responsibility to consult with your instructor when you are unsure in a situation or when a patient's condition is changing rapidly. You need to know what your state's Nursing Practice Act is as well. Nurses are responsible to meet patients' health care needs and meet these needs in a safe and caring way. As a student, you must apply classroom learning and theory in the clinical setting. Accountability entails a commitment to stay current and knowledgeable. Accountability also means asking for assistance when you are unsure, performing nursing tasks in a safe and prescribed manner, and also reporting and documenting assessments and interventions, as well as evaluating the care given to the patients and the patient's response to that care. Some states make a distinction between delegation and assignment. It is your responsibility as a nurse for ensuring patient safety and the observation of patient rights. Delegation can mean the assignment of duties from one person to the next person. LPNs may supervise nursing assistants, technicians, or other LPNs. Delegating nurse duty is to supervise and evaluate care that a licensed or unlicensed person provides. Standards of care provides a way of judging the quality and effectiveness of patient care. Legally, a nurse is responsible for his or her actions under the Nurse Practice Act and according to the standards of care that are approved by that profession. Standards are defined in nursing procedure books, institution manuals of policies and procedures or protocols, and nursing journals that outline current skills or techniques. When a licensed nurse is charged with a violation of a Nurse Practice Act, there will be a hearing to determine if the charges are true. In regards to professional discipline, state boards of nursing are responsible for discipline within the profession. Most common charges brought against nurses include substance abuse, incompetence, and negligence. It is considered negligence not to report another's professional misconduct. Many states have laws that require evidence of continuing education after a nurse has passed the licensing exam. Nurses must continue their education to keep abreast of changes in healthcare practice, pharmacology, and technology in order to practice safely. Nurses may stay current by attending programs provided by their employer, through participation in the professional organization, by attending workshops, seminars, or presentations on healthcare topics, or also by reading professional nursing journals. You can also stay current by formal continuing education in colleges or by correspondence courses. Laws and guidance affecting nursing practice. When a licensed nurse accepts employment with an agency or an individual, the nurse is required to work within the laws and regulations governing nursing in that state. There are also federal laws that regulate safety and health in the workplace and forbid discrimination and sexual harassment. Although not law, the patient care partnership, understanding expectation, rights, and responsibilities, provides ethical guidelines for nursing practice. Please refer to your textbook on page 34, box 3.2, regarding the patient care partnership overview. In this slide, you have a list of laws and guidelines affecting nursing practice. Please look into your textbook and read thoroughly to familiarize yourself with the content on this slide. Occupational Safety and Health Act, Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act, discrimination, sexual harassment, Good Samaritan laws, patients' rights, National Patient Safety Goals, HIPAA, and consents and releases. Occupational Safety and Health Administration, also known as OSHA. OSHA sets regulations on handling infectious, toxic materials, radiation, safeguards, and electric equipment. OSHA requires orientation and education in topics such as bloodborne pathogens, exposure, fire, bomb threats, lifting, and evacuation procedures. Additionally, OSHA requires facilities to keep a record of hazardous substances as well as a materials safety data sheet, known as the MSDS. CAPTA, also known as Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act, defines child abuse and neglect as any recent act or failure to act that results in imminent risk of serious harm, death, serious physical or emotional harm, sexual abuse, or exploitation of a child by a parent or caretaker who is responsible for the child's welfare. Licensed healthcare professionals are required to report child abuse. In 1964, federal legislation made it illegal for employers to discriminate, to hire or promote or fire employees on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. This law has been amended to include protection for people with disability as well as discrimination based on age. In our society, in which sexual comments and activities are commonplace on television or movies, we must be aware of the right time and place for sexual suggestions or explicit words or touch. Sexual harassment refers to unwelcome sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, or other verbal or physical conduct of a sexual nature. It is illegal when used as a condition of employment or promotion, or when it interferes with job performances. In most states, there is no legal requirement for a nurse to provide aid in an emergency. The Good Samaritan laws protect any healthcare professional from liability if he or she stops to provide aid in an emergent situation. Liability is limited unless there is evidence of gross negligence or intentional misconduct. Under some legally specified conditions, certain rights may be temporarily suspended, such as in an emergency when the patient is unconscious or unable to communicate. Patient's Bill of Rights was revised to the Patient's Care Partnership, Understanding Expectations, Rights and Responsibilities in 2003. The Patient's Rights is an ethical and not legal document. It seeks to preserve patients' dignity, privacy, freedom of movement, and information needs. State legislators have written laws that prohibit certain actions or guarantees particular rights for patients. The Joint Commission updates the National Patient Safety Goals every year. You can visit their website for the updated versions. The National Patient Safety Goals provide evidence and expert-based solutions to problem areas in terms of patient safety. A sentinel event is an unexpected patient care event that results in death or serious illness or injury to the patient. Most frequent causes is lack of communication among caregivers. The patient's medical record is a legal document that includes records of all assessments, tests, and care provided. It must be kept confidential, and only people directly associated with the patient's care have access to the information in the chart. It is the property of the hospital, agency, or physician, not the patient. The patient does have the right of access to the chart and copies of information in the chart. Okay, let's review this question together. Universal guidelines are developed for all nursing interventions, which define appropriate measures that should be observed during the performance of those interventions. These are known as A. Scope of practice, B. Advocacy, C. Standard of care, or is it D. Prudent practice? The correct response here is C. Standards of care define actions that are permitted or prohibited in most nursing interventions. These standards are accepted as legal guidelines for appropriateness of performances. Lesson 3.2, Protection from Lawsuits and Code of Ethics. Upon completing your reading assignment of Chapter 3, as well as previewing this presentation, you'll gain the following knowledge. You'll be able to discuss what you can do to protect yourself from lawsuits or the damage of lawsuits. You'll be able to differentiate a code of ethics from laws or regulations governing nursing and compare the similarities of the code of ethics from the National Federation of Licensed Practical Nurse, known as the NFLPN, also from the National Association for Practical Nurses Education and Service, known as the NAPNES, and then also from the American Nurse Association, the NAA. You'll also be able to describe the National Association for Practical Nurse Education and Service standards of practices. You'll bring the following knowledge to the clinical setting. You'll be able to describe 3 factors necessary for informed consent. Explain advance directives and the advantage of having them written out. And also, you'll be able to consider the relationship between the HIPAA and the use of social media. The Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, also known as HIPAA, require the creation of regulations regarding patient privacy and electronic medical records. Failure to comply with the rules may lead to civil penalties. Intentional violation of the regulations can lead to a sizable fine and time in jail. It is critical for you as a nurse to make certain that your patient's privacy is maintained. How can a patient have information sent to another agency, physician, or insurance company? Let's think about that question. Patients must sign a specific release form if they want information to be sent to another agency, primary care provider, or insurance companies. You always have to be sure that you obtain the patient's consent. What is a consent? Consent is a legal document that records a patient's permission to perform a treatment or surgery or to give information to insurance companies or other healthcare providers. Informed consent indicates patient's participation in decision making, and also the person signing must know what the consent allows and be able to make a knowledgeable decision. If the patient has any questions, he or she should be satisfactorily answered before he or she signs the consent. It is important to determine the proper consent has been obtained, both legally and ethically. Failure to obtain a valid informed consent may lead to charges of assault and battery or invasion of privacy. A release is a legal form used to excuse one party from liability. A commonly used release form is a leave against medical advice, also known as the AMA. Often, patients are upset when leaving against medical advice. Every effort should be made to have them sign the form and complete the form in its entirety. But sometimes patients may refuse to sign it. If this occurs, complete the form and on the patient's signature line, note that the patient refused to sign the form. Release forms may also be referred to as forms used to authorize an agency to send confidential health care information to another agency, school, or insurance company. Witnessing wills or other legal documents. Occasionally, nurses may be asked to witness a will or other legal documents. Most hospitals and healthcare agencies have policies against witnessing wills or legal documents. If will is consented, the nurse could be called to testify regarding the patient's health or mental condition or relationship to visitors. An advance directive, sometimes called a living will, is a consent that has been constructed before the need for it arises. It spells out a patient's wishes regarding surgery and diagnostic and therapeutic treatments. It allows a person to plan for, communicate his or her medical wishes if unable to do so for themselves. A durable power of attorney is a document that gives legal power to a healthcare agent, who is a person chosen by the patient to follow the patient's advance directives and make medical decisions on his or her behalf. All 50 states recognize advance directives, but each state regulates advance directives differently. Violations of law. A nurse needs to know about a number of civil laws to practice safely and within the legal system. A nurse also needs to know not only the laws about her own practice, but also how to act as a patient advocate. An advocate is one who speaks for and protects the rights of the patient. Negligence and malpractice. Negligence is failing to meet the standard of care and failing to do something that a reasonable and prudent person would do, or doing something a reasonable and prudent person would not do. Malpractice is negligence by a professional person. The person does not act accordingly to professional standards of care as a reasonable and prudent professional should have. In nursing malpractice, a reasonable and prudent person is a similarly educated, licensed, and experienced nurse. In order to prove malpractice, 4 elements must be present: duty, a breach of duty, causation, and injury. Common legal issues. As nurses, we have access to patients' private information and personal contact information. It is our responsibility to keep the patient's information safe. When legal boundaries are violated and injury occurs, nurses may be subject to litigation. What is litigation? Litigation is another word for lawsuit. So in this slide, I'm going to define for you assault and battery. Assault means to threaten another person or to threaten to harm another person, even to threaten to touch another person without that person's permission. On the other hand, battery means the actual physical content that has been refused or that is carried out against the person's will. So adults who are alert and oriented have the right to refuse treatment, refuse medications, baths, dressing changes, irrigations, insertion of catheters, and diagnostic tests, as well as the refusal of surgery. It is your responsibility as a nurse to make sure that the patient is well informed. If you force the patient to carry out a procedure or treatment after the patient refuses this may be considered assault. It is not appropriate for you as a nurse to physically force the patient to do anything, such as physically force them to take a drug. Defamation is when one person makes remarks about another person that's untrue, and that remark may actually damage the other person's reputation. There are two types of defamation. One type is slander, which is oral, and the other type is libel, which is done by written format. A person who is sued for slander or libel may be found innocent if the statements made were true, or if they were said or written with no intent to harm the person, but for a justifiable purpose. So, again, defamation is actually when remarks about a person is made that are not true. So when we're reviewing this slide here regarding invasion of privacy, really consider your actions as a nurse and how you want to protect your patients from invasion of privacy. So invasion of privacy occurs when there has been an actual violation of the patient's confidential and privileged information and privileged nature, and there is a violation of this professional relationship. When patients entrust themselves to your care, they expect that you're going to maintain confidentiality and you hold truth to your profession as a nurse. Invasions of privacy occurs when unauthorized persons learn of the patient's history, condition, or treatment from the professional caregiver as yourself. This might be done when you're giving information about a patient over the phone to a caller who asks about the patient's condition. It occurs also when healthcare workers are overheard carelessly discussing the patients in elevators or cafeterias. Remind yourself not to discuss patients' information in public settings. False imprisonment refers to when you prevent a person from leaving or restricting their movement within a facility. So if your patient is requesting to leave the facility, they have the right to do so. Preventing them from leaving or preventing the patient from moving about in the facility is considered false imprisonment. When a person wants to leave the hospital against the advice of a primary care provider, remember they have the right to do this. In these circumstances, a release to leave against medical advice is issued. When involuntary admissions is made against patient's wishes to protect him or her from self-harm or from harming others, he or she may be detained without consent for a short time. The use of protective devices requires a physician's order at all times. Devices may be mechanical or chemical. The inappropriate use of devices that limit a person's mobility can result in charges of false imprisonment. You must be alert to abuse of protective devices. If there's less restrictive techniques available to your patient, you must advocate for such use of less restrictive techniques. Nurses should always consult with their supervisors about using protective devices in an emergency situation when no physician order is available. Although nurses cannot prevent a lawsuit from being filed, there are certain actions you can take to reduce the likelihood of a litigation. You can ensure nursing competence, report incident or occurrence files and reports, as well as obtaining liability insurance. Nursing competence refers to possessing skills, knowledge, and experience necessary to provide adequate nursing care. If for any reason you do not feel confident in a procedure or feel confident in having particular knowledge and experience in any circumstance, be sure to seek additional support from your supervisor. Documentation is key. It is key in proving nursing actions were used and also protects you from liability. If documentation isn't done, then the task was considered not completed. So if it was not documented, it was not done. Lawsuits may be avoided by early identification of dissatisfied patients. So ensure that you establish a rapport and effective communication skills with your patient. This creates a relationship in which patient's anger or misunderstanding will be reduced and can resolve any potential growth to a lawsuit. Incident or occurrence reports. This is a document of occurrences that is out on the ordinary. You document what happened, the facts about the incident, and who was involved or witnessed it. Generally, it is not filed as part of the patient's chart, nor reference to the incident report is made in the patient's chart. So, liability insurance. It protects the livelihood and assets of a nurse. It pays for a lawyer to defend the nurse and may also pay for attorney costs. Ethics in nursing. Ethics are rules of conduct that have been agreed to by a particular group. These rules are agreed to be morally right or proper for that group. Ethics are different from laws in that they are voluntary. So the Code of Ethics, please refer to box 3.9 in your textbook on page 45 for the NAPNES Code of Ethics. So what are Code of Ethics? It is a respect for human dignity and the individual and provision of nursing care that is not affected by race, religion, lifestyle, or culture. It is a commitment to continuing education, to maintain one's competence, and to contribute to improved practice. Also, it is the confidential nature of the nurse-patient relationship, outlining behaviors that bring credit to the profession and protect the public. Many healthcare facilities have ethic committees that are composed of people from various departments. They collaborate amongst each other to develop policies and to address issues in their facility. And they come up to a better understanding of ethical dilemmas from different viewpoints. Some of the departments that participate in an ethics committee are nursing, medicine, surgery, psychiatry, pharmacy, legal, economics, spiritual, as well as social work. As nurses, we face many ethical dilemmas on a daily basis. Please familiarize yourself with those kind of ethical dilemmas we would face within our practice. Refer to page 45 in your textbook. So we could be faced with treating a patient who has to make a decision between life-prolonging treatment versus refusing such treatment, or caring for a patient who's deciding on initiating or terminating life support or treatment. Assisted suicide is another ethical dilemma, as well as euthanasia. So assisted suicide is aiding a person to the end of his life. Assisted suicide is also often confused with euthanasia. Remember, these terms are not similar. They're not the same. Euthanasia is the act of ending another person's life, with or without the person's consent. Again, go back to Chapter 3, page 45, and become familiar with these terminologies and certain scenarios of ethical dilemma within our practice. So as we approach the end of this presentation, please remember to go back to read Chapter 3 in its entirety, as you are responsible for knowing the entire content of the chapter. Nurses, again, practice following codes of ethics. We provide behaviors to promote excellence in our patient and in our profession. Let's review this question together. Since a nurse's first duty is to the patient's health, safety, and well-being, it is necessary to report A, unethical behavior, B, a worker who arrives late, C, favoritism, or is it D, arguments among the staff? The correct response here is A. A member of the nursing profession must report behaviors that do not meet established standards. Question 3. Malpractice is negligence by a professional person. In other words, the person does not act according to professional standards of care as a reasonable, prudent profession would under the same or similar circumstance. In order to prove malpractice, 4 elements must be present. Which of the following is not an element of malpractice? Is it A, defamation, B, duty, C, breach of duty, or is it D, causation? Defamation is when one person makes remarks about another person that is untrue, and those remarks actually damage the person's reputation. The other 4 elements are actual elements of malpractice that can result in injury or damages. Question 4, final question. When Mrs. Tingle, aged 82, is admitted, the nurse noticed bruises all over her body and suspects elder abuse. She may report her suspicions to everyone except the A, supervisor, B, police, C, family, or D, appropriate agency. The correct response here is C. Nurses are required in most states to report information regarding child or elder abuse or violent acts that may be crimes to the appropriate agencies, but not to other family members. The end. This concludes my presentation on legal and ethical aspects of nursing. Thank you.